My name is Alara, and I'm 32. I live in Oak Haven, a town tucked into the folds of Oregon's Willamette Valley, a place where the scent of rain-soaked earth and Douglas firs clings to everything. It's a community knit together by shared histories and long memories, where the slow, quiet rhythm of the seasons dictates life more than any clock. I've always felt a deep kinship with that rhythm, with the silent, determined growth I see in the world around me. It's why I became a botanist, spending my days in a small, sunlit lab, studying the intricate ways plants communicate and heal. That afternoon, the late autumn sun cast long, golden shadows across the valley. I had just finished cataloging a new series of adaptogenic herbs when a text from my father lit up my phone. Family dinner tonight, 6 p.m. Be on time. It was his usual terse style, nothing to raise an alarm. I pictured the scene that always awaited me. My mother, Helen, humming as she pulled a pot roast from the oven, its savory scent filling the house. My younger sister, Claire, arranging a centerpiece of dahlias from her meticulously kept garden. But when I arrived, the house was submerged in a strange and unsettling silence. I opened the door and the quiet hit me first. There was no aroma of cooking food, no classical music drifting from the old speakers, no warm, welcoming light spilling from the kitchen. There were only 3 figures seated in the formal living room, arranged like a tribunal, their postures stiff and practiced. My father, Arthur, retired history professor, sat bolt upright in his wingback chair, his expression a mask of stern disappointment. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap they were bloodless, as if she were physically holding herself together. Leo, my older brother, was the picture of ease, lounging in an armchair with a faint, knowing smirk playing on his lips. And then there was Claire, who glanced up as I entered, her eyes shining with a cool, sharp glint of malicious satisfaction. I forced a smile, the gesture feeling brittle on my face. What's with all the serious faces? Did I miss a memo? No one answered. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, my father spoke, his voice devoid of warmth. Sit down, Alara. I took the empty chair directly across from them, my spine instinctively straightening as if I were awaiting a verdict. The room felt like a stage, and I was the only one who hadn't been given the script. Leo broke the silence, his tone casual, almost bored, which only made his words more brutal. You withdrew nearly $10,000 from Mom and Dad's long-term savings account. You really think no one would notice? A cold shock went through me, prickling my skin. What? I heard myself say, the word a small, hollow sound in the cavernous quiet. He casually tossed a printed bank statement onto the polished coffee table between us. A single withdrawal was circled in a vicious red. The bank confirmed the transfer was initiated from your IP address. It's your name on the transaction, clear as day. I reached for the paper, my heart beginning a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I'd never had access to that account, not the password, not the security questions. It was their nest egg, something they spoke of in hushed, reverent tones. That's not me, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Someone must have stolen my information. Oh, don't play the victim, Alara, Claire chimed in, her voice dripping with disdain. It's always someone else's fault, isn't it? By the way, she added, her eyes narrowing, are you still seeing Professor Davies? You know, the married one with 2 children. I shot to my feet, a surge of hot, indignant anger rising in my chest. What are you talking about? He's my mentor. Claire sneered, a perfect, polished curl of her lip. His wife called me. She told me everything. How you seduced him to get ahead on your research. And while we're on the subject of your character, you tried to kiss my fiancé at our engagement party last year. He told me himself. The air left my lungs. The room began to swim, the edges blurring. You're both making this up, I whispered, looking from Leo's smug face to Claire's cold one. I turned to my mother, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. She wouldn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on her tightly knotted hands. You've changed, Alara, she murmured, her voice a fragile thread of sound. We don't recognize the person you've become. My hands clenched into fists at my sides, my nails digging into my palms. The pain was a small, sharp anchor in the dizzying chaos. Why didn't you ask me? Why didn't you come to me and just ask? Why do you just believe them? My father's voice cut through my plea like steel. We've heard enough. We've made our decision. You are no longer a beneficiary of the family estate, and you will leave this house tonight. I opened my mouth to argue, to scream, to beg, but no sound came out. The familiar room, with its gallery of family photos on the mantelpiece and the old piano I'd learned to play on, began to feel alien. Every object, every memory, seemed to dissolve, slipping away from me like sand through my fingers. You have 1 hour, Leo said, a note of finality in his voice. Your things are already packed. The bag is in the hallway. I turned my head mechanically toward the front door. There, sitting neatly on the slate tile, was an old canvas duffel bag. My bag. They had gone into my apartment. They had packed my life into a single piece of luggage before I had even walked through the door. I walked out of the living room, my legs moving on their own accord. No one called after me. My mother didn't rise from her chair. My father sat as still as a statue, a strange look of relief settling over his features, as if a great and burdensome weight had finally been lifted. As I passed through the garage to get to my car, I saw my father standing by the large recycling bin. He had just tossed something inside. Over the rim, I saw the familiar worn leather cover. It was my grandmother's collection of botanical journals, the ones she had left to me, filled with her elegant script and pressed wildflowers from half a century of walks in these woods. They were my most treasured possession. Seriously? I asked, my throat tightening until it ached. He didn't even flinch. He just shrugged. Figured you wouldn't need these where you're going. I didn't cry. Not then. A profound and chilling numbness had settled deep in my bones. My body moved toward my car, driven by an instinct more primal than choice. No home, no family, no savings to speak of. But as I turned the key in the ignition, I knew one thing with a certainty that burned through the fog of shock. This was not an ending. This was a beginning. I drove without a destination, the winding country roads blurring into a tapestry of dark green and gray. The wind buffeted the car, a physical manifestation of the storm raging inside me. The feeling of being violently severed from everything I had ever known as home was a raw, open wound in my chest. Eventually, I pulled into a brightly lit gas station on the outskirts of a town called Silver Creek. Across the street, an old motel blinked a neon vacancy sign into the deepening twilight. I rented a small room for the night. The air inside was stale, smelling of disinfectant and something vaguely sad, but the lock on the door clicked shut with a satisfying thud. I slid down the cool, painted wall and sat on the threadbare carpet, my phone held limply in my hand. I scrolled through my contacts, a ghost tour of my former life. I stopped when I saw a notification. No missed calls. No texts from my parents asking if I was safe. The dark screen reflected a pale, haunted version of my own face. I opened my purse and pulled out a small, crumpled receipt for a pregnancy test I had bought 4 days ago. My body had been sending me quiet signals, a persistent fatigue, a strange new sensitivity to smells, but my mind had been a whirlwind of research deadlines and the growing, unspoken fractures within my family. I'd told myself I would wait, find the right time. Now, there was nothing left to wait for. I walked into the cramped, cold bathroom. The fluorescent light above the mirror was harsh and unforgiving. 10 minutes later, I stared down at the small plastic stick I'd set on the edge of the sink. 2 pink lines. Stark, clear, and undeniable. My hands gripped the porcelain counter, my knuckles white. My mind, which had been racing for hours, went utterly blank. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just whispered a single, anchoring thought into the silence of the room. At least I'm not completely alone. A wave of lightheadedness washed over me, and I sat down heavily on the toilet lid, one hand instinctively going to my stomach. It wasn't pain, just a profound, grounding pressure as if my body had just unlocked a door to a future I couldn't yet imagine. I reached for my phone again. My fingers moved with a will of their own, typing out a simple message. "We need to talk." The recipient was Liam, the only person whose number I hadn't even considered deleting. 3 hours later, a gentle knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find him standing there, his familiar form a beacon of calm in the chaotic darkness. He wore an old flannel shirt and a beanie pulled low over his thoughtful eyes, which were filled with a mixture of concern and a softness that instantly eased some of the tension in my shoulders. Liam was never the kind of man my family approved of. He came from a family of vintners, but he'd chosen a different path, working in land conservation and sustainable agriculture. He cared more for the health of the soil than the size of a portfolio. My father used to call him that idealistic farmer with his head in the clouds. He stepped inside, his gaze taking in the bleakness of the small room, his eyes mapping the invisible bruises I carried. "Elara," he said, his voice low and steady. "What did they do to you?" I didn't answer with words. I simply handed him the pregnancy test. He looked at it, his expression unreadable for a long moment. There was no shock, no panic, none of the reactions I had braced myself for. He just sat down on the edge of the stiff motel bed, his large, capable hands clasped between his knees. "How far along?" he asked quietly. "I think about 6 weeks. But Liam, there's something else." I took a shaky breath. I was kicked out. My family disowned me tonight. His eyes sharpened. "Because of the pregnancy?" "No. They don't know. They believed Leo and Claire. They accused me of stealing money, of having an affair with my mentor, of destroying Claire's engagement." He didn't say a word, but I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten, his right hand clenching slowly into a fist. "I'm not looking for pity," I said quickly, my voice stronger now. I thought you should know." He let out a long, slow breath and finally looked at me, his gaze clear and direct. "Elara, I have never for 1 second believed the stories they tell about you. I know who you are. I was there at that symposium in Portland. I saw Leo present your research on plant-based adaptogens as his own. I saw that first slide, how your name was just gone. And I saw you sit there in the audience, silent." I froze, staring at him. "You noticed that?" "I'm not blind," he said gently. "And I didn't walk away. I just figured you'd need time to decide what to do." I moved to sit beside him, my back resting against the cold wall. The silence that fell between us was comfortable, a shared space of understanding. "What are you going to do now?" he asked, his voice still soft. "I don't know," I confessed. "I have no home, no savings, and it's not just one baby. I had an early ultrasound last week at the university clinic, just to be sure. It's twins." Liam's eyes widened slightly. And then, a slow, soft laugh escaped him. It wasn't a laugh of mockery, but one of pure, unadulterated wonder, like a ray of sunlight breaking through a dense bank of fog. "You know," he said, shaking his head slightly, "the only thing scarier than the thought of having kids is the thought of walking away from the person you love when she needs you most." I turned to look at him fully, my heart catching in my throat. "You're saying?" I'm staying," he said, his voice firm. "You're not alone in this. We're not alone in this." I rested my head on his shoulder, the solid warmth of him a profound comfort. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I exhaled a long, deep breath that wasn't laced with fear. I woke around dawn in that small motel room, where the weak morning light struggled to penetrate the thin curtains. The pillow beside me still held the faint indentation from where Liam had sat for hours, watching over me as I slept, his hand resting gently on my stomach, as if he were guarding something precious. He had left before sunrise for a pre-planned work trip, a consultation on soil health at a vineyard down the coast. But on the small nightstand, he'd left a cup of tea and a note written on a motel napkin. "I believe in you, in the work you've done, and the world you're about to build." I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my wallet, placing it next to the only photograph I had left, a faded picture of me and my grandmother, her arm around my shoulders, standing in front of her beloved greenhouse in the Willamette Valley. It was a photo Claire had once said was too rustic and embarrassing to display in their perfect family home. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my laptop, and navigated to the backup folders on my hard drive. There it was, the raw, untarnished soul of my life's work. My dissertation project on the cellular response of native Oregon botanicals to environmental stressors, The research I had poured 3 years of my life into, the very same work Leo had so effortlessly stolen. It had all crystallized at the Pacific Northwest Botanical Symposium 2 years ago. I'd never been comfortable with public speaking, so I had agreed to let Leo, the charismatic, media-savvy face of the family, be the presenter. We had an agreement. I wrote the material, he would deliver it. I sat in the audience, my palms sweating, clinging to a naive hope that he would honor our pact. But then the first slide appeared on the giant screen. The title was the same, but below it, in bold, elegant letters, it read, Lead Researcher, Leonard Vance. My name had been completely erased. Slide after slide, it was the same. No credit, no footnote, not even a mention in the acknowledgments. I turned to my father, who was sitting beside me, a knot of confusion and hurt tightening in my throat. I was about to whisper, why, but he just nodded toward the stage, a proud gleam in his eye. Leo is finally stepping up, he murmured to me. He has a real presence. You could learn a thing or two from your brother, Alara. I sat there, frozen in my seat. I didn't protest. I didn't make a scene. I just swallowed the bitter taste of betrayal and watched my work, my passion, my identity, be handed over to him like a gift. After the presentation, Leo was approached by a pharmaceutical company with a lucrative research grant. I knew he didn't understand the nuanced biochemistry behind the data, but it didn't matter. He was the son, the heir apparent, the brilliant future of the Vance family. And I, despite having conducted over 80% of the research, was systematically written out of the official publication that followed. No one asked my permission. My name ceased to exist in any record connected to the project. My mother once told me, her voice laced with gentle concern, women who get too lost in their academic pursuits tend to lose their way, dear. It's better to focus on settling down, on building a home. I almost believed her. I almost quit the field entirely. But my grandmother had been the one to anchor me. In my sophomore year of college, she had given me a small, silver locket she always wore, its surface worn smooth with time. My mother gave this to me when I won my first scholarship, she had told me, her eyes bright. Now, it's your turn to carry it. I treasured it. But a week after she passed away, the locket vanished from my jewelry box. I asked Claire if she had seen it. She just shrugged, a picture of innocence. I have no idea. Maybe Grandma wanted me to have it? After all, I was the one who arranged all the flowers for her memorial. 3 months later, at her lavish birthday party in a Portland hotel, I saw it. The locket was clasped around her neck, gleaming against her silk dress as she laughed with her friends. It's a family heirloom, I overheard her say. Grandma left it to the one she knew would appreciate its value. I stood silently in the doorway, the truth landing with a quiet, devastating weight. In my family, I was not meant to be seen or heard. My role was to be a silent contributor, a ghostwriter for the successes of my siblings. I closed my laptop, the weight of all those years of quiet erasure pressing down on me. I had been silent for too long. I had allowed them to rewrite my story, to twist my narrative until I was barely a footnote in my own life. Not anymore. I reopened the research folder, the one labeled drafts_raw_EV. Inside were my original, time-stamped notes, my hand-scrawled diagrams, every iteration of the work in my own unmistakable handwriting. I stared at the screen, a new kind of fire beginning to burn in my chest. If they had erased my name from everything, then I would simply start again, with my name at the very top. The only question was where to begin. And for that, I already had an answer. Not a place, but a person. A person who once told me, you don't need their approval, Alara. You just need to build something they can't tear down. I picked up my phone and opened a new message to Liam. Do you remember that idea we talked about last year? About an independent research collective focusing on women's botanical medicine? I hit send. His reply came back almost instantly. I'm on my way back. You have the vision. I have the land. Let's build it. I looked out the motel window. The sky over Oregon was heavy with clouds, but for the first time, I didn't feel the threat of a storm. I felt the promise of rain. I moved out of the Silver Creek Motel on a crisp February morning when the fog lay like a soft, white blanket over the vineyards lining the highway. Liam helped me find a small cottage for rent on the outskirts of Oak Haven. It was an old place, with paint peeling from the window frames and floors that creaked with every step, but it was quiet, and it had a small plot of land out back that caught the morning sun. It was large enough for a desk, a comfortable armchair, and, in the near future, 2 cribs. We furnished it with second-hand finds, a sturdy oak table that became my workstation, a small fridge from a thrift store, and a microwave borrowed from an elderly neighbor. I set up my computer and printer on the table, stacking old botany textbooks, ones my father had once dismissed as niche and impractical, to get my monitor to the right height. I was officially starting over. My idea was to refine the research Leo had stolen, but to take it in a new direction. I wanted to develop a prototype model for testing how certain plant-based compounds, or adaptogens, could be used to detect early markers of cellular stress in women, especially pregnant women, a demographic so often excluded from clinical studies. This had been the quiet heart of my original dissertation, before Leo had stripped it down and repackaged it as a flashy pitch for investors. I still had the first drafts, the messy equations and observations scribbled in a faded blue notebook from my 4th year of grad school. I wasn't trying to reclaim the past. I was determined to build something entirely new from its ashes, with my name etched into its foundation. One evening, Liam came home from a long day of clearing land for a new community garden, carrying 2 cartons of takeout and a pint of strawberry ice cream. As we ate, I looked at him and asked, "What do you think of the name Solara Labs?" He considered it for a moment, a thoughtful look on his face. "Sol, like the sun?" I nodded. "And Era, like my name. A place for my own light, I guess." A small, genuine laugh escaped me. I once thought I'd name a daughter that, if I ever had one. But maybe it can be the name of a company first. We both smiled at that. An hour later, I was online and solaralabs.org was officially mine. The LLC registration was in process, and I designed a simple, temporary logo, a single, sprouting leaf inside a circle of light, using a free online tool. Within a week, I had filed for a small-scale botanical research permit in the county. We had no funding, no formal lab, and no reputation. But I had my data, my grandmother's journals, and a deep, unwavering belief that the current system was failing too many women like me, the quiet ones, the silenced ones, the ones carrying new life who were told to just wait and see. I spent my days at the Oak Haven Public Library, which had free Wi-Fi and quiet corners perfect for concentration. I taught myself how to write grant proposals, how to conduct market analysis, and I read every FDA report on botanical supplements published in the last decade. In the afternoons, I'd drive to Liam's family vineyard, where he let me use the office printer to run off copies of my first pitch deck. He never offered unsolicited advice, but he'd leave gentle pencil notes in the margins of the pages. "Focus on cost-effectiveness here. They'll connect with the story, but the numbers have to be undeniable." He was right. I didn't need anyone's pity. I needed someone to believe in the science. A week later, on a whim, I submitted an application to a women-led startup accelerator in Portland. It was a competitive 3-month program with a $50,000 seed grant for the winning pitch. I didn't expect to win. I just needed a single opportunity to be heard. The interview was held in a sleek downtown building with glass walls and minimalist furniture, the kind of place where your worth felt judged the moment you stepped off the elevator. I wore a simple, dark green dress that gently skimmed the noticeable curve of my belly, and a soft gray cardigan Liam's sister had loaned me. As I walked into the conference room, I saw a flicker of something pity, surprise, in the eyes of the 3 judges. I didn't let it unnerve me. I began with my first slide. Currently, the average cost of preventative cellular health screening for pregnant women in the United States is prohibitively expensive and often not covered by standard insurance. Solara Labs has developed a testing model using plant-based biomarkers that can reduce that cost by over 60%. I kept my presentation focused and clinical. No personal backstory, no mention of my family, no hint of the injustice that fueled me. Just the data, the science, and my unwavering belief in the work. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then one of the judges, a woman in her 50s with elegant silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, looked at me directly. "Ms. Vance," she said, her tone neutral, "have you had any institutional backing for this project?" I met her gaze and allowed myself a small, steady smile. "Just me," I said, "and the 2 children who have yet to be born." A long, significant pause followed. She made a note on her legal pad, her expression unreadable. That evening, back in my quiet cottage, an email arrived. "Congratulations, Alara Vance. You have been selected as one of 10 founders for the Cascadia Innovators Program." I sat at my oak table and cried. Not loud, racking sobs, but quiet, cleansing tears of relief. It felt as if a heavy stone I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted from my chest. Week 3 of the Portland Accelerator program culminated in an event they called Investor Speed Dating. Each founder was given exactly 5 minutes to pitch to 3 different potential investors. The room buzzed with a nervous, electric energy, a blend of strong coffee, expensive perfume, and the staccato rhythm of anxious typing. I wore a simple black dress and had tied my hair back in a neat, low bun. My pregnancy was more obvious now, a gentle, swelling curve that I no longer tried to conceal. As I stepped into the room, surrounded by 30 other ambitious founders, I gave myself a silent reminder: don't let them see a liability. Let them see the mission. My first table was with Anya Sharma, a woman around 40 with bright, curious eyes and an air of genuine interest. She listened intently to my pitch, asking insightful questions about the specific botanical compounds I was using and the scalability for community health clinics. I left her table feeling seen and respected, a quiet confidence blooming in my chest. At the second table sat an older man in a tailored suit, his expression skeptical. 3 minutes into my presentation, he held up a hand to interrupt me. "If this technology is as revolutionary as you claim," he asked, his tone laced with doubt, "why does a researcher with your apparent talent have no affiliation with a major university or an established lab?" I took a breath and answered him evenly, my voice calm. "Because I once made the mistake of letting someone else take credit for my work. I'm not making that mistake again. I'm rebuilding it from the ground up, with my own name on it." He paused, studying my face for a long moment, then gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. Then came the final table. The investor's name tag read Marcus Davies. He was a tall man with impeccably styled hair and a look of bored superiority. He barely looked up from his phone as I began my presentation. I moved through my slides with practiced precision: enzyme activation rates, target demographics, cost-benefit analysis, all presented with clean, compelling graphs. When I reached the slide detailing our minimum viable product, he finally looked up, a condescending smirk on his face. "How old are you?" he asked, the question a complete non sequitur. "I'm 32, I replied, keeping my tone professional. "And you're pregnant, I see," he said, his gaze dropping pointedly to my stomach. I met his eyes directly. "Yes, with twins." He leaned back in his chair, the smirk widening. "A single woman, pregnant with twins, with no major institutional backing and no lab of your own. And you seriously believe you can run a biotech company?" His voice was smooth and quiet, but the words were designed to cut, to dismantle the confidence I had so carefully constructed that morning. All around us, the low hum of conversation continued, as if his casual dismissal was just part of the ambient noise of the business world, too common to even notice. My fingers tightened into fists under the table, but my expression remained neutral. "I don't believe I can, Mr. Davies." "I know I can. And I'm not alone." He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Not alone? You mean you have a silent partner?" "I mean," I said, my voice clear and steady, "that there are millions of women, pregnant or otherwise, who are under-researched and underserved by our current healthcare system. I'm building this for them. I carry their stories with me." He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Well, good luck with your crusade, Ms. Vance. But venture capital isn't a charity." I gave him a polite nod, gathered my materials, and walked away from the table without a backward glance. In the hallway, I leaned against the cool wall, my hands finally beginning to tremble with a surge of cold fury. I wasn't shocked by his prejudice, but I was enraged by it not just because he was wrong, but because he was so certain that his view was the default, the unspoken truth that everyone in that room silently accepted. I was heading toward the restroom when a gentle hand touched my arm. It was Anya Sharma, the investor from the first table. "I was at the table next to yours," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I heard what he said to you. You handled that with incredible grace." I managed a faint, weary smile. Before I could thank her, she pressed her business card into my hand. "This is my direct line," she said. "When you're ready to present a full financial projection and a 5-year plan, send it to me. I'm not making any promises, but I am promising to listen to your entire story, without interruptions." I took the card, my fingers closing around the crisp edges. "Thank you," I whispered, the words feeling inadequate. That afternoon, back in the quiet sanctuary of my cottage, I placed Anya's card on my desk like a talisman. I opened my laptop, but instead of revising my pitch deck, I opened a blank document. The first words I typed were a promise to myself: I don't have to prove I can do this. I just have to do it. The Oregon Botanical Medicine Conference was held in early April at a grand hotel overlooking the Columbia River. It was a prestigious event, with gleaming chandeliers and hushed, carpeted hallways where the biggest names in the field gathered to share their latest findings. I hadn't even considered attending, but 3 days before the conference, an organizer called me. A speaker had canceled at the last minute, and they had an open slot. I submitted my presentation abstract within the hour. The material was already there, honed and refined by months of solitary work. By the time I arrived at the conference, my pregnancy was a beautiful, unavoidable truth. I wore a simple, knee-length navy dress and a soft blazer, a choice meant not to hide my body but to frame it, to present myself as a whole person, a scientist, a founder, and a mother-to-be. I wanted them to listen to my words before they made assumptions. I had no major foundation backing me, no glossy logo on the program. My bio was a simple, 2-line description: Alara Vance, an independent researcher developing biomarker tests for underserved women. As I walked into the main lobby, I stopped dead. There, to the left of the grand entrance, stood a 10-foot-tall banner. It featured a professionally shot, softly lit photograph of my sister, Claire. She was wearing a crisp white lab coat, her head tilted in a look of faux sincere contemplation. Below the image, in bold, elegant script, were the words: "The Elysian Health Initiative, revolutionizing women's wellness." My breath caught in my throat. At the very bottom of the banner, a quote was printed in a delicate serif font: "Every cell carries its own story. We just have to learn how to listen." I recognized it instantly. It was a line from my grandmother's journal, one I had transcribed into my own research notes years ago. I had used that very same line in my initial proposal for Solara Labs, a document no one had ever seen except, I now realized, Claire, who had borrowed my laptop one afternoon to print an essay. I didn't need any more proof. I knew exactly what was happening. Inside the main ballroom, I scanned the speaker schedule. Claire was listed as the final keynote speaker for the day, for a session titled Biotech, Philanthropy, and the Feminine Future. I was scheduled to speak right before her. When my name was called, I walked onto the stage, feeling the weight of hundreds of curious eyes. I could sense their questions. Who is she? The pregnant woman with no credentials? I didn't start with a polite greeting. I opened with my first slide, a stark cost comparison chart. I followed it with slides of raw data from the 3 small community clinics I had quietly partnered with over the last few months. The room, which had been filled with a low murmur of conversation, gradually fell silent. After the 4th slide, I clicked the remote, and the screen went black. I turned to face the audience directly. "I know what I don't have," I began, my voice clear and steady in the large room. "I don't have a multi-million-dollar foundation named after me. I don't have glossy photos with celebrity endorsements. I don't have a carefully curated brand story." I paused, letting the words settle. "I have only one thing: the truth." A few people shifted in their seats, their attention now fully captured. I once lived in a world where my voice was considered an inconvenience, I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room. Where my work was signed with someone else's name. Where my ambition was labeled as a character flaw. I'm not telling you this to ask for your sympathy. I turned and clicked to my final slide. It was a blurry, candid photo Liam had taken of me late one night, working at my oak table under the warm glow of a single lamp. I'm telling you this because if you are here today, feeling inspired by the Elysian Health Initiative and their talk of listening to cells, then you deserve to know that their story didn't begin with their founder. It began with a woman who was cast out for refusing to remain silent. I looked directly toward the back of the room, where Claire had just entered, holding a stack of her own printed remarks. Her eyes met mine across the crowded space. She froze, the color draining from her face. "That work is mine," I said, my voice resonating with a quiet, unshakable power. "The concept is mine. The words on their banner are mine. No one has the right to tell my story but me." The silence that followed was not one of confusion. It was heavy, weighted with understanding. The moderator, looking flustered, hurried onto the stage to thank me and move the program along. Claire didn't come forward for her keynote. She turned and walked swiftly out of the ballroom, her elegant suit a blur of retreat. As I stepped down from the stage, an older woman who had been sitting in the front row stood up, walked over to me, and gently took my hand in hers. "Thank you," she said, her eyes shining. "You just did what so many of us in this room have wished we had the courage to do for decades." I didn't know what to say, so I simply smiled. And as I glanced back at the stage, where the next speaker was setting up, I knew that in that moment, I had reclaimed something far more valuable than research data. I had reclaimed my name. 2 days after the conference, a crisp, white envelope arrived at my cottage. It had no postmark, just my name typed on the front, and had been slipped under my door. I knew it wasn't a note of congratulations. I opened it. The bold heading read, "Legal Notice, Cease and Desist." The sender was the Elysian Health Initiative, represented by Claire Vance. She had chosen to respond not with a conversation or a confrontation, but with the cold, impersonal language of the law. The letter accused me of defamation, of deliberately fabricating information to damage her personal reputation and undermine her organization's brand. It demanded that I retract my statements, issue a public apology, and remove any recordings of my speech from the internet, or face a civil lawsuit. I folded the letter neatly and placed it on the table. There was no panic, no surge of fear. Just a quiet, weary resolve. Liam, who was at the counter chopping vegetables for dinner, looked over at me. "It's from them, isn't it?" I nodded. "It is. And she has no idea that I've been ready for this for months." I went to my laptop and opened a folder I had labeled Solaro_archive. Inside was the arsenal of truth I had been quietly assembling since the day I was cast out. There were photographs of my grandmother's original journals, with time-stamped metadata from my old phone. There were the first drafts of my dissertation, with digital footprints proving my authorship long before Elysian Health ever existed. There was an audio file from the day Claire had borrowed my laptop, a recording I'd made of a lecture and forgotten to turn off. On it, you could hear her on the phone with a friend, laughing. "My sister has all these brilliant ideas, but she has no idea how to sell them. Honestly, she's practically gifting them to me." There were scans of my lab notebooks, stained with coffee rings, showing the early diagrams and molecular structures she had later adapted for the Elysian logo. I took everything to a lawyer in Portland named Renee Marshall, a sharp, no-nonsense woman renowned for defending independent innovators against corporate Goliaths. She reviewed my evidence, her expression growing more focused with each document. "So," she said, looking up at me when she was done, "do you want to play defense and simply counter their claim, or do you want to go on the offensive?" "Offensive," I said without hesitation. "But by the book. I don't want to destroy her. I just want what is rightfully mine." Renee smiled, a quick, fierce flash of a smile. "Good. They think a threatening letter is enough to make a woman like you back down. We're about to show them what a real fight looks like." A month later, I received a court summons. Plaintiff, Claire Vance and the Elysian Health Initiative. But below it was our response. Defendant and counterplaintiff, Alara Vance, filing for intellectual property theft, copyright infringement, and unauthorized use of proprietary research. On the day of the preliminary hearing, I arrived early. So did Claire. She wore an immaculate cream-colored suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, clutching a designer handbag like a shield. She walked into the courthouse with the air of someone who believed she was there to correct a minor administrative error. But the moment her eyes met mine across the sterile room, I saw her polished composure falter. Renee leaned toward me and whispered, "Let me open." In her opening statement, Renee was direct and devastatingly clear. "Your Honor, this is not a case of family squabbles or professional jealousy. This is a case of theft. A deliberate, calculated heist of intellectual property designed to convert one woman's life's work into another's personal and financial gain." Claire's lawyer countered, arguing that scientific ideas are often developed in parallel, that inspiration is universal. He painted Claire as a visionary philanthropist and me as a bitter, jealous sibling. Then it was my turn to speak. I didn't raise my voice. I simply presented the evidence, piece by logical piece. The time-stamped files. The audio recording. A sworn affidavit from my old university advisor, confirming that the core concepts of Elysian's work were identical to the dissertation he had personally overseen me develop years prior. Finally, I looked directly at Claire. "You can steal a tagline," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent courtroom. "You can copy a logo, but you cannot replicate the lived experience behind the work. You cannot fabricate the years of sleepless nights, of painstaking trial and error, of the deep, personal connection to the research. That work has a soul. And that soul is mine." The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a will of iron, listened to everything. After reviewing the initial evidence, she tapped her gavel gently. "Based on the preliminary evidence presented," she declared, "this court finds sufficient cause to grant a temporary injunction against the Elysian Health Initiative, halting any and all use, distribution, or promotion of the disputed intellectual content pending a full hearing." Claire sat frozen in her chair, her face a pale mask of disbelief. I walked out of the courtroom not with a feeling of triumph, but with a profound sense of peace. The story had finally, officially returned home. That summer, Oakhaven was warm and fragrant. In the small patch of earth behind our cottage, Liam built a beautiful greenhouse from reclaimed cedar and old window panes. Inside, I began cultivating the rare herbs needed for the next phase of my work, developing a targeted extract I believed could inhibit the growth of certain types of cancer cells. The local community college, where I had once taken a night class, offered me a small corner of their science lab, rent-free, in exchange for my promise to mentor their female science students. Solara Labs continued to operate, not as a slick startup, but as a quiet, mission-driven entity. A small nonprofit in Seattle, impressed by my speech at the conference, awarded us a seed grant of $75,000 with a single directive: focus on the women everyone else forgets. And so I did. We developed a mobile testing kit, simple, enzyme-based, and affordable, and partnered with free clinics in rural parts of Oregon and Washington. In our first 2 months, we reached over 300 women, providing early-stage cellular screening to uninsured and low-income patients who had never had access to it before. There were no press releases, no celebratory galas. But the numbers spoke for themselves: an 87% detection rate for cellular abnormalities at a fraction of the cost of traditional methods. And then, on a rainy September night, my own 2 little miracles arrived. We named them Rowan and Sage. Liam held my hand through the entire delivery, his calm presence my anchor. As I held them for the first time, their tiny bodies warm against my chest, I looked at him and whispered, "We made it." We didn't have a big celebration. Just a few close friends, a homemade carrot cake, and a handwritten card from my elderly neighbor. It read, "To Alara, the woman who grew a forest from a single seed, and to her 2 beautiful saplings. May you always live a life that needs no one's permission." I read her words and knew, with every fiber of my being, that she was right. I was no longer seeking permission for anything. A few months later, I received an email from a major cancer research institute in California. They had heard about my work through the clinic network and wanted to collaborate to adapt Solara's technology for a large-scale, early-stage ovarian cancer screening project. I flew down to meet with them, with Liam and the twins in tow. It was the first business trip of my life where I felt no need to shrink myself to make others comfortable. During the meeting, after I'd laid out the entire technical pipeline, an older, distinguished scientist looked at me with a warm, respectful smile. "Did you ever imagine you'd get this far on your own?" he asked. I glanced over at my twins, sleeping soundly in their double stroller, and then looked back at him. "I was never on my own," I said simply. "And I'm not stopping here." My old family has remained silent. There has been no apology, no contact since the court injunction. I no longer wait for one. They are free to live inside the hollow story they constructed for themselves. I am too busy living in my truth. One morning last week, I stood before the whiteboard in my small but growing lab. I wrote the title of our next major research proposal: Development of Targeted Therapeutic Peptides for Early-Stage Ovarian Cancer. Underneath it, in bold, black marker, I added a note: Lead researcher, Dr. Alara Vance, founder of Solara Labs. I paused, and then I smiled. I no longer had to reclaim my dignity. I was living it. In every early morning feeding with Rowan, in every late-night data analysis with Sage asleep on my chest, in the simple act of putting on my lab coat each day. I had started with less than zero, and with my own two hands, I had built something that no one could ever take from me again: a life of purpose, of worth, and of a future defined entirely by me.